Super great. So, welcome everyone to the Municipal Accessibility Leads Community of Practice. I'm Julie Glazer, the manager for Equity, Anti-Racism, and Accessibility Program Support at the Association for Municipal Administrators of Nova Scotia, otherwise known as AMANS. This space is dedicated to helping accessibility leads in municipalities prepare, implement, and improve their accessibility plans. And if this is your first time joining us, please pop a hello in the chat. Let us know where you are joining us from so we can extend an extra special welcome to you today. We have a full session in terms of the content scope today, so we're going to get right to it. The Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Guide, the MEL Guide, was supported by Nova Scotia's Accessibility Directorate to help municipalities with monitoring and reporting on your accessibility plans. This guide has been developed over the past year with a working group with members from municipalities and an evaluator from the Accessibility Directorate. I'm pleased to introduce you to your facilitators for today's session, Elise Johnson and Lisa Jacobs. Elise Johnson moved to Nova Scotia in 2017 as an architect and mom to a son with autism and a moderate intellectual disability. She soon got involved in job coaching through NS Works and the development of Liverpool's universally designed play park through Autism Nova Scotia. This work led to an RHFAC training and ultimately Elise getting the role of accessibility coordinator for the region of Queens in the summer of 2020. Elise was part of the working group that helped the consultants develop the MEL tool starting in February 2022. Lisa Jacobs is a senior policy analyst with the Nova Scotia Accessibility Directorate. She has been working in the area of monitoring and evaluation for over 15 years and is a nationally credentialed evaluator. We also have with us today, I believe, from the Accessibility Directorate, Terry Lynn Almeida and Laura Beth McPherson, who champion the work that all of you are doing and are always ready to listen to your needs and provide support. Elise and Lisa, thank you for presenting the MEL Guide to us. And I'm going to mute myself now so you no longer hear a lawnmower. Take it away.
All right, Lisa, do you want to say anything before I get started?
No, just that I apologize. I did really just come in from the garden and I'm realizing my hair looks terrible. So
Well,
no, take it away.
I'll get the screens up for us to all watch. I am going to my share screen. I'm going to share that particular window. And how are we doing if I start the slideshow from beginning? Oh, now of course I can't see anybody. So you're going to have to holler to make me stop. So I'll get going.
Quite seeing the big screen yet.
Oh no.
I'm not.
You were not seeing the big screen?
But Elise, what about if I share and then you just have your, well, you wouldn't be able to see yours for your notes.
I'm not seeing notes anyways.
Okay.
It tells me I'm sharing this window. And so when I started the slideshow, it didn't change.
At least we can see like the slides on the side. It's a different format than I think I don't know what platform you're using there or what.
Oh, and now I'm seeing the title. This takes my whole screen. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And maybe I'll try sharing my screen instead of the window. Share screen, try that again. Entire screen. Share that. So now you see all of it. If I make that larger and start the slideshow, now tell me what you see.
That works.
That works, yeah.
Okay, great. And my pink arrow mouse as well?
Yes.
Alrighty. Okay, without further ado, we are looking at the monitoring and evaluating of accessibility plans. This is the guide for the Nova Scotia municipalities, and it was a lot of material that went out, so I'm not sure how much people went through. Hopefully it didn't feel too overwhelmed, so we'll go through it in the parts that they're presented. The part 1 is going to be the introduction, bit of background, the why. Why are we doing this? Then you get into the part 2, which is the what. It's the pathway, the map to accessibility. Part 3, measuring, is how. How are we getting information back to know what we're doing and why? And then we'll try to have a bit of group discussion and feedback. So here we go. Why? We know MEL stands for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And we do want to remind ourselves why MEL is important for the municipalities. Of course, the number one reason would be the Act requires us to do this. And taken straight from the Act, we talk about we're making our report on the measures taken and intended to take to identify, remove, and prevent barriers. But we also are mandated to get information and procedures in place to assess the following. So if we're changing policies, programs, practices, and services, any proposed enactments or bylaws we're administering, other prescribed information, anything we're doing needs to be measured and assessed by definition. So just before I get into the nitty gritty, I did want to kind of do a shout out. I won't see hands, so maybe Elisa can call on people, but honestly, just shout out. Why are we working on accessibility improvements? To get us thinking. Why are we doing this work? Anyone want to just shout out?
To remove barriers, please.
Why?
So that all people, regardless of abilities, can access services, especially in the public setting. Everybody, it's a human rights. Everybody has the right to enjoy and work and live and play.
Aha. So you really went right to that ultimate goal. You mentioned the human rights. So I won't ask again, but similarly, what is this act trying to achieve? Not only is it trying to achieve reducing barriers, it's beyond that. It's so that you can participate. But is the work effective? Anyone? Maybe yes, maybe no. To some degree. What degree? I don't know. And exactly what I just said. How do you know? How could we know?
Heather McCallum says, we're getting there with a question mark. And Danielle Martel says, support all persons within our province.
Great. Yes, we do want to support everybody. And we hope we're getting there, little baby steps. But again, how are we measuring this? And why is it important to know? Maybe rhetorical. I'll keep going. And how can we share? We're going to get into the why it's important to know. We want to know, the municipality wants to know, and this would be true for most prescribed public sector bodies, if it's making a difference in the lives. I know I have bought products, but is it making a difference in people's lives? I'm not totally sure. Of course, we want to celebrate some accomplishments, the progress being made. Want to wave our feather and pat ourselves on the back. But really, I like this one, number 3, helps municipalities make informed decisions. So we need to answer the questions like what is working well, what improvements should be made, where are supports needed. And this whole tool was stemming from the directorate who was asking municipalities, what do you need? And everybody sort of said, we need help here because, templates are useful when we're all busy. We shouldn't be spinning our wheels doing the same work. So here we have a nice tool, and lessons learned will inform our next steps. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But measuring really does lead the work if you can take from the answers. We want to keep municipality and province accountable to community. Look what we're doing, what we said we would do. I mean, of course, it's taxpayers' dollars, but we need to do what we're saying and follow up in a meaningful way. A little more background on the development of the MEL. As I mentioned, the directorate wanted to support municipalities in this monitoring and reporting. We had a nice range of voices, not all with us here today, but accessibility leads from Town of Kentville, the District of Lunenburg, Chester, Bridgewater, Mahone Bay, and Lunenburg all together. So that's a different type of lead that we move through our jobs quite differently. Myself, accessibility lead for Municipality of Queens. HRM, we heard Melissa couldn't join us today, but her role is so different from mine. Just the sheer scale, size of the municipality means that how we work is very different. So we'll get into that later about how we each could use the tool to best reflect our role. Then we had other people like council members from the District of Yarmouth, and we had municipal support from AMANS. Even before Julie, we had Holly McClellan, and we had the Accessibility Directorate as well. That out of the way. So we tried to keep some guiding principles in mind as we went through this development. Of course, we wanted it to be useful, of course, as practical as possible, step by step. And maybe it doesn't feel that way at the beginning when you read all the preliminary stuff, but when you get to the end, to the final tools, I think you'll see that it is a very plug and play, step by step, useful guide, or this is what we'll be trying to get feedback on. We made sure that it was outcome focused, aligned with the ultimate purpose and end goal of the act. As Earl reminded us, this is human rights. We're not just doing it because the act says so. The act is doing it. Why? Because we want people engaged across the board, across the province in all ways. So let's keep that in mind. We want to make sure that it is standard to kind of keep us on the same page and yet flexible because we do have different contexts. Make it customizable to various contexts and capacities. What I said. Informing our future work. Talked about feedback loops that we're learning from our lessons. We want broad municipal direction and vision, which means when your municipality is looking at, land use planning or capital projects, 3-year plan, any number of broad vision statements, we want to make sure that that work is continually informed by the information we're getting back about the accessibility work. It has to be included at all levels through all departments. Getting into the steps, touched on it a little bit. We're definitely engaging, involving others in planning and implementing of the MEL. So as much as first voice is coming into original plans, we also need everybody engaged. Like I said, all departments, council, public, staff, committees, everybody needs to be engaged. You're going to plan and develop the MEL plan, and it's not super hard. It's not as in-depth as the accessibility plans. And then, of course, we're going to act. We're going to implement this plan, and we're going to learn, reflecting as we report, lessons learned, cycle back again, how to do it better for the next steps. Getting to the what, that was the why. Getting to the pathway, the map, also called a logic model. We're going to get a graphic soon. That's presenting the key actions. What are we doing that the municipality should take, and the desired results, the outcomes from these actions that can be achieved to be more accessible. A little more detail, actions. What are you doing? What are you producing? What are you creating? That leads to outputs like a deliverable. So we collected First Voice to create a committee. That committee did the work to produce a plan. But you can't just stop there and say, yep, tick, done that. You got to see what were the outcomes. Was it effective? What were the results of these outputs or completed actions, the changes you want to see, the difference you want to make. And these we broke down into sort of a scale or spectrum, starting with the foundational, what you expect to see happen, and you have direct control over these. So if you've created this committee, yep, got it. Are they making their plan? Yep. Is that being followed through to create more accessibility? We have a certain amount of control. But then what about a little bit longer term? We'll break it up into the medium term. What we want to see happen contributing to these outcomes. So if I, in the plan, had a ramp, I built the ramp. Yep, I expect to see people use the ramp. What I want to see happen is that people get out more, that they're engaging in community activities, long-term and ultimate goal, that they're getting more involved. Maybe now they're sitting on the board of the theater, long-term impacting people's lives. Here's our summary visual for the logic model. We talked about key actions, our to-do, our tasks. We're going to move through to foundational outcomes, what we can pretty much expect to happen, control. A little less control, what we're hoping, wanting to see happen. Longer term, broader, ultimate goal, full human rights, fully participating. And major important is that the scope of your MEL plan, how much of the monitoring and evaluation you're going to be able to do, dependent on your municipality's priorities and available resources. As we know, staffing is stretched. What's the capacity? You might need some finances involved, your own community, how supportive they are. So your plan will really need to balance what your requirements are to report and your desire to monitor versus your capacity. So not to be overwhelmed, just you're going to take away what you can and think of baby steps. Oops. Okay, breaking down this logic model, this pathway to accessibility. First steps are our actions. We're going to take a bit of time here to really go through them, and the guide breaks it down nicely. Each point, so this number 1, engaging people with disabilities, I'm going to give you a quick flash. You're going to see in your guide, it's going to break it down to all of this and related outputs. We need to engage people with disabilities. We'll be developing and updating our accessibility plans. We will deliver and participate in accessibility training and education. We'll implement those accessibility plans. We will apply accessibility lens to municipal policies, regulations, bylaws, and processes. We will communicate and promote accessibility information and accessibility progress. We will collaborate with local, regional, and provincial partners. And we must monitor, evaluate, and reflect. So this to-do list is a little bit more of the checkbox, like, okay, yep, we've done that. Done a little bit of that, done that. But first, foundational outcomes. Is there an increased awareness and understanding of the rights of people with disabilities because of all these things we're doing? Has this happened? Have we increased capacity to identify, prevent, and remove accessibility barriers? Has increased and meaningful participation of people with disabilities at different levels of municipal decision-making happened? So back to my personal experience with advisory committee. Yep, got my committee, tick. They self-identify, tick. Do they feel meaningfully engaged? Do they see it coming through? So how am I going to measure that? And we can imagine there's probably questionnaires, that type of thing. We're going to be collecting data, and the compendium is going to give you a lot of great examples to do that. So continuing with our first step of outcomes after our tasks, are we getting accessibility improvements made in municipal built environment, employment, goods and services, information and communications, and transportation, those 6 categories that we know well? Are we getting those done? As our plan infers, are we getting those done? Municipality takes a learning-focused approach. So are we reviewing, reflecting, changing our approach once we know what works better than others? And after those foundational outcomes are starting to be seen as moving through, yes, I think we're definitely increasing our capacity. We're definitely increasing our awareness. Well, next step here, the medium-term outcomes. We want to make sure that people with disability have meaningful access to municipal built environment, services, and employment processes. So back to I've put a ramp in, but if it's not meaningful, is nobody using it, or where's it going, or what happens once they're in? We need to ask how this is affecting people, how it's impacting them in a positive way, hopefully. And if it's negative, gosh, my ramp, there was some ice and snow problems. It got the power door blocked. We had to close off the ramp. What wasn't working? Why? You're getting feedback. Circle back. Number 2, people with disability are meaningfully employed, broadly represented, and advancing within the municipalities. So we built our ramp to the admin building. We've changed our HR policies. We've done some training to improve, attitudinal barriers. But are people being employed? Do we have a broader range of voices and staff yet? Don't know. How would we check? We'll have some tools. Non-municipal built environment, so a bit beyond our scope, but if the municipality is leading by example, hopefully the built environment, services, and programs even outside the municipality are improving their accessibility. Getting into long-term outcomes, we want Nova Scotia communities to be welcoming and inclusive for all people with disabilities. The municipalities are leaders, as I said, with their inclusive practices for all people with disabilities. And we're coming towards that ultimate goal where all people in Nova Scotia who might identify as having a disability can enjoy their human rights and be fully engaged. So this is sort of the broad, what are we measuring because of our whys? Oops. As I say, in the guide, it will take each of those, 8 key actions, and it'll break it down. It'll tell you maybe some of the outputs that you're doing. And this feels very intuitive. And, we wanted to go over that a little bit. But it should feel right. We should feel like, yep, making sense, hopefully. After the key actions, we're moving to our foundational outcomes. So same thing in the guide, you're going to have a table that breaks down each of these with full detail to make sure that we understand what we're talking about. Medium term, we're just going down through that map, that pathway, breakdown, so we make sure we're all understanding what do we mean by meaningful access. Goes into here, are they engaged, involved in shaping decisions? All of those are listed out. We're going to move to the main steps. As we talked about, engaging, planning, act, that nice cycle. We're involving others in planning. So who is this going to be? There's a nice chart for you. In Appendix A, there's a list, a table for your working group and your key advisors. So you can use this to identify who you want to engage for developing and implementing this plan. List people who work in your municipality that have responsibility for implementing your plan. I mentioned before there might be counselors versus committee versus staff. You might want to put somebody from your advisory committee on. I feel like there's a bit of leeway here, but so you list your people within the municipality or otherwise, different backgrounds. Maybe they're more technical expertise, they have a specific knowledge in an area, or the lived experience. Putting their name, title, or role. Do they have responsibilities related to the plan? I like to think the answer is yes for everybody, by the way, but we might need to remind our staff that. Some staff might say like, oh no, that's not my role. So you might have to help remind them, well, because you're information and communications, you do have an element of making sure that our information is accessible. Maybe you're the IT guy, or maybe you're the community, or maybe you're in finance. Are your forms screen readable? You might have to remind people of their capacity to help. Technical expertise. This person should be. You might put a little tick there. I like to say, or parts of it. Again, not everybody needs to be involved in everything, but let's really try to get as many people involved here as possible. You'll decide how much input that person is going to give. So we've got a nice team now. Don't know why my arrow doesn't work. We've engaged. Then we're developing our plan. So to develop the plan, we're going to select some of these actions, all those actions that I talked about, you know, the advisory committee, the creating a plan. There were 8 steps that we looked at. Again, go back to your guide for the details. We were given a list of priority questions to help define the scope. What actions has a municipality completed from our accessibility plan? To me, that's a very hands-on, very specific. So I know in my plan, I've said we're going to do X, Y, Z. Those are the actions. But we're moving to what extent are the lives of people better as a result of these improvements? Yeah, kind of losing. How are we doing so far? I want a little check-in. I can't see anybody.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I was just going to jump in here, Elise, on this slide. So there's really 2 different approaches that you can take to select the actions and outcomes that you want to monitor. And so the priority questions, which are listed on page 7, that's one approach where you can look at the question. You can look at the questions and say, okay, our municipality would be very interested in answering this question. For example, what actions has our municipality completed from our accessibility plan? Many of you are probably tracking that anyway, but if you decide you want that as a question, then that'll direct you to the kind of information that you will have to monitor. The same one, you know, to what extent are the lives of people with disabilities better? If you want to answer that question, then there's certain things that you want to monitor to be able to get that data. And so you can use that approach, or you can just go through the one-page visual of the actions and outcomes and just select them that way. I tend to use a bit of a mix of the two, but I think the priority questions are really useful in terms of getting focus for your MEL plan, because it can get unwieldy very easily if you don't have a really tight focus on the questions you're trying to answer.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's kind of either or, a bit of both. If you look at them, I think you'll be able to find one. So I think I put here's our checklist of actions. So the number 2, use the checklist, Appendix C. Here's Appendix C. And first step of actions, the 8 that we saw as part of that logic model, they're all here. I have continued is smaller. We can't read it all, but it's for you to get a visual of what the page looks like. There is a table with the actions, and you're going to ask yourself, or the municipality, this group, the working group will ask themselves, will we monitor and report progress on these actions? Hopefully, there's quite a few yeses at the beginning here. Convening a committee. Oh yeah. Engaging people with disabilities. Getting input from the committee. So yes, this will help. As described, this is helping to determine what is in your plan. You don't have to do everything. After actions, remember we moved to foundational outcomes. So same thing, you're going to choose what you're going to monitor and report on. Increased awareness and understanding of the rights. Okay, yes. Increase organizational capacity. Yes. Participation at different levels of decision making. Your group will decide, maybe it's still just a maybe, or maybe like, no, that's going to be like next year, depending where you are. After foundational, we know we have medium-term outcomes. So again, really following that logic model. The key actions, the first column that we saw on the left, 8 parts to it, defined, and moving through foundational, medium-term, towards long-term. So are we going to monitor meaningful access. And you will see how you might. So you can choose, like have some study of it all and come back. As I mentioned, maybe not the first year, maybe a following year. We're updating our plans. This might be a process that you lay out for the next few years. Finally, getting to the part 3, the actual measuring. How are we measuring? Things called the indicators. May or may not have come across this in your work yet. An indicator is a sign that shows you sort of the status, what something's like, whether or how a situation is changing, especially across time. So you're going to be given a list of indicators that might be helpful to gather data for some of these questions. So for example, if the outcome was increased employment, yes, we're trying, I've put a ramp here, I've done the training, I've done my actions, but is this happening? Well, an indicator might be the participation rate of people with disabilities in the labor market. I like the arrow going up. If the percentage goes up, this would be an indication that change has occurred. So this indicator data would be used to monitor and evaluate whether accessible employment efforts were working. We've done our actions, moving towards foundational outcomes, moving towards medium term, and the tools will help us see whether it's working. Now, of course, some will be quite qualitative versus quantitative. You know, do we have actual numbers or not? And the benchmarking over time. This year, I decide I'm going to track it. Even if I don't think I've made an impact yet, I'm going to track it so I have a baseline. And then by next year, I'm hoping there's been an improvement. We're getting into our indicators. That's Appendix D. After your checklist in the guide, we've done our working group. We've done our checklists. Appendix D is indicators. So following the logic model, I actually jumped to 1.3, but our actions, 1.1 was, the committee. 1.2 was the plan. 1.3 is training and education. So yes, we've done them. What can be used to collect is found in the compendium. So what's my data source? This is starting to tell you where you might gather that data and how you might gather that data in terms of the number and type of your training opportunities delivered, how many people took them, how many municipal employees. So I actually have my own little tracking, and maybe many of you do. But what I like about this is that then we're all a bit more consistent, and maybe that shares back provincially. But even over time, if somebody else takes my position or any number of reasons, we're all going to have like a consistent place where everything is together. And we'll see the example of that tracking form soon. Next steps, like at each indicator, there's going to be ideas, a focus group with municipal staff. Okay. From actions, we move to foundational outcomes, repeating that, steps through the logic model. How about that increased awareness and understanding of rights? We can look at the percentage based on a survey. So here's your data source to answer the questions. These are the indicators relating back to the breakdown of the outcomes that we want to see happening because of the actions we're taking. So as we go down. After foundational comes medium-term outcomes. This is what we're hoping will happen based on the previous steps we've taken. Do people with disabilities have meaningful access to the built environment, all the categories? Have our complaints gone down? We're using a tracking form to look at the numbers. Who report access to municipally owned facilities, spaces, programs? Do we have an increased percentage of people with disability that are accessing things? We might need a survey of community members. We might have a focus group. These are given very specifically. We'll get to those so you can see. But the final product in the compendium are things that you can just walk with and go create a focus group. You can go have a survey ready. You don't have to start from scratch. On it goes. All right. We're now at step 2 to develop our plan. We've got our working group. We've done a checklist. We know what we want to be reporting on or not based on this checklist working group. You want to see indicator data. Is it giving me the information I want to know? You are choosing what is most important and easy to collect. Maybe you're just going to work on what you're doing already. So if somebody's working a lot in the built environment, maybe they're going to go with that. I know some of the leads are more recreation based. Maybe they're going to go with that. But you have a broad group. You've pulled in other people. So hopefully you can touch on a range of areas. Finally, step 3, you're going to select the methods to collect the data. As I said, in the compendium of tools, you got a bunch of templates. The tracking form is used quite often, as we started to see in the tables that I showed. You have the Accessibility Advisory Committee Focus Group guide. So I'm going to bring them together and I'll say, okay, we've been talking, but how do you feel about this? Like, do you feel you're being heard? Do you feel we're getting work done? We can do the same thing with community organizations. Check what kind of outreach, awareness building there's been. Ask your staff, some probably more aware than others. Let's get some data on that. You can survey community members. You might have done that already to develop your plan. Probably time to do it again. I know that's true for me. Survey the staff. I've had a lot of staff turnover, volunteers, elected officials, elections coming up. We need to do training, and training can actually happen from these focus groups. So here's the example of the tracking form in itself. In the compendium, you'll open up and all the different things, all the different tools that we just went through. Here is a tracking form. Part of action 3, I jumped to the training again. We're going to start to write the date, the name of the training. What were the topics? Was it plain language? Was it screen readers? You know, blah, blah, customer service, assistive devices? Who gave it? Might have been in-house, might have been some of these great workshops that are being provided through the directorate. How many participants? What type of participants? I find I can get a good number of staff, especially if the CAO really encourages it. Some counselors come to everything, some less so. Your volunteers, you know, let's keep track of who's coming to these things, because maybe we need to have a special focus for the council if they're not coming to the regular staff meetings. Like, you're going to learn from these numbers. And here we can plug in total number, and maybe more importantly, the percentage, because we're all different sizes. Types of training. So we probably have seen more of a certain kind versus another kind, just what's being offered out there. Here's an example of the survey. Again, you can't really read it, but I wanted you to have a visual to be familiar with it. Sort of multiple pages. I think there's 4 pages or so. It gives you a template for the survey, different surveys. This one is for the staff, volunteers, and elected officials. Give a little intro, talks about confidentiality. It gives you some identifying markers. And then it has some questions, and there's a scale where you're asking people, let's say, has my understanding of accessibility as a human right, has it increased? Strongly disagree, all the way to strongly agree. So you're guiding, well, there's the focus group guide, but in this case, it would be a survey, it can be fully anonymous. You're gathering data. And there is an Excel workbook that's going to show you everything pulled together as one big visual, because maybe we're starting to feel like it's a lot of different things here, but it's going to link each output from your completed actions. It's going to link that and the outcomes to the suggested indicator, which we've seen in the tables, but that kind of gets spread out. This is all compact. It defines the indicator, it'll list the data collection and describe the indicator. And this is what it looks like. Again, it looks maybe overwhelming, but it very much follows the pathway, that map. We have key actions, foundational, moving to medium, and longer term outcomes. They're numbered, they're relating back. It'll tell you the indicator number, and it'll tell you you can use a tracking form, or you can use a focus group according to the green. And these were seen in the indicator tables, Appendix D as well. I'm going to try to give a bit more of an example, although I think we've talked about this already. If my planned action is to deliver accessibility training, done it. Tick. The output was that the training happened. But which training and to whom and what were my numbers? Don't know until we go through that indicator and Appendix D suggests that I use this tracking. And then I can plug in, oh, okay, 85% of the employees, 40% of the volunteers. Fantastic. What was the impact? Did it actually work? Was anybody listening? Were they distracted? What was the impact? Did we have an increased awareness? Back to the indicators, and then we'll take another tool like the survey that we just did before. Okay, so I'm hoping that's making sense. Increase capacity. We check the indicator. It'll give us suggestion of which tool to use in the compendium. We have our focus groups. We have our surveys. We collect the data. And then maybe we'll be able to answer this a little bit and use it as a baseline when we do it in a year or two. So another part of this is who is doing the analysis, and hopefully you have a strong working group. It's not meant to feel like a lot more work. It's supposed to be what we're doing already, and it's just a method of recording. It's a method of tracking, and then we have something to come back to reflect on. You will choose your timelines. We've got this accessibility plan update coming. So for me, it's very timely. I'm going to be using these tools to inform that update. And I'm going to treat them like awareness training as well. Like just as you go through, it is bringing up awareness. And arrow doesn't want to work. So I've repeated this. It's been repeated here. This is our pathway that can be detailed in many different points. And the basic, what we really want to emphasize is that the scope will be dependent on your priorities, resources, trying to balance capacity. So big pause, breath, time is ticking. Lisa, jump in. Maybe.
Oh, I think that was really a good overview of the guide. At this point, we wanted to throw it out there and take a little break and ask people what they, did anything not make sense? Do you need a bit more clarification on certain things that Elise covered? Did you get stuck anywhere? And if so, where? So we could actually stop the slideshow and just open it up, because the next thing after this was we were going to have an open discussion and get you to sort of engage a little bit with the logic model, the pathway to accessibility, and see which actions and outcomes resonate kind of the most with you. So, but now let's just talk about, the guide itself and your reaction to it. And I see a question here from Rachel. So there looks like some excellent resources, looking forward to digging into them. However, I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed with this. Yes, we thought you would be, and accessibility is just one of many elements of your job. So Elise, do you want to, as someone who works in the area, respond to that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm privileged in that I have a dedicated role, and I understand that is not true for everybody, but even my role is being pulled in different directions, for better or for worse. So you're going to go back to your working group, and you're going to try to pull in as many people as possible. And as I say, reminding them that this is their work too. This is everybody's work. It helps to have some buy-in, maybe from a CAO or, certain directors. And I hate pushing just the legislative act need. So let's go back to some of those other whys, that we have many reasons why we need to do this. And little by little, a thin layer over top. So when we're going to do that training, let's just be recording it and then surveying the people that have done it. And then when we implement anything in our plan, let's just get some feedback. Let's get, users. So I have ramp at the theater I keep going back to. Do I have surveys at the box office? Am I engaging the people selling tickets and they're giving assistive devices? I've asked them to track like how many people are using that power operated door, how many people are borrowing the headsets. Yeah, try to get other people to do the work for you as well, I guess is part of my answer.
So any other questions or comments about the guide? And maybe some of you haven't had a chance to really take a close look at it. Any general questions, concerns?
I don't have a question, but I want to congratulate you on the guide. It's really, I think you reached your goal around being user friendly or like step by step. I have to admit, when I saw logic model, I thought, oh no, now here we go again, because to me that's hard work, and you've created the logic model that makes sense to me. So, thank you.
Thanks. It's really nice to hear that. We did, I mean, this took about 2 years of, we had a big gap in between, and I think the working group approach was really good. Having people who are involved in doing the work really have a say over what the guide looks like and how it can be most useful. I think that worked out really well.
Michelle?
Yeah, I have a question about the working group. I really like that idea. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing yet. So just any tips on that? Like, are you more thinking staff and counselors and people on the committee? Are you thinking community members? Because I've brought forward working groups for staff before, and that hasn't been really something that people have the capacity to do. But maybe now that it's in this guide, it will be. Yeah, I just was wondering if there's anything else that we could talk about there.
Well, I would love to hear from other people, how their experience has been with getting support from other staff. I've had mixed results, and I'm sort of a medium size. I thought I was small, but compared to some of them, I'm not. Does anybody have it? Some lessons learned, how to engage staff, council, how to encourage. And that's the thing. People might think that it's worthwhile. They're not going to tell you like, no, it shouldn't be done, but they're like, I can't take on anything else.
Well, and I think that's why we built in the approach of, you might want to approach some people just to act as an advisor. If you can't get that initial buy-in of them sort of being on a working group, then just invite them to sort of, review some of the actions and outcomes that you thought might be worth monitoring. I see working groups, they're useful for 2 reasons. One, if you have a working group and you invite certain people to the table, it's a way of engaging them and developing buy-in. So there might be some staff in your municipality who aren't really, I don't know, as engaged as you would like them to be. And so if they're on this working group, this might be a nice way to sort of engage them in the work further. And then it's also, of course, to accomplish the work that you need to do. So, you kind of have to play around with it in terms of who's available. I do think it's important to have first voice at some level involved in the working group and deciding on the actions and outcomes, because that keeps it really grounded in the ultimate goal of improving lives. So,
and I would emphasize that it shouldn't be a ton of work. The work's been done. Like you'll see in the survey and the focus guides, like you don't have to recreate it. It's just to use it and to decide at the beginning, what will we report on? So maybe if there's such low capacity, we're going to keep it really low, but maybe we're going to hit those points of capacity because that sounds like it needs work.
And if you start small and just maybe pick one or two actions, one or two outcomes, and you really try to do a good job of collecting the data and then reporting on it, it might build an appetite for more if people can actually see, oh, this is good information, I can use that. Or, next year it might be, a little bit more.
Rachel?
Yeah, just going back to, I guess, what Michelle was asking and talking about the working group. I think that we have here a working group, but really we've met twice, I think, since we've started working on the accessibility plan. A lot of staff here have so much other stuff going on that they feel like accessibility, they kind of update where they are with their action items maybe twice a year, and that's it. That's their accessibility. So I think having a working group that's a lot more active would be quite helpful to us. We do have one for a working group for equity, diversity and inclusion, and I'm really jealous that they get all that support of that group. So I think I'm going to have a discussion with our CAO and see if we can have something similar for accessibility. So, I mean, I'm just interested to hear what other people have to say about what's worked for them with working groups.
I'm curious to know with the group here, like maybe if you just would even put in the chat a thumbs up or put a thumbs up in your uh, view here if you actually do have a working group.
And you mean different from an advisory committee?
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I know
So-
some communities have within their advisory committees also broken down work into working groups. I think West Hants is one of those that has done that. But yeah, maybe if folks can just give a thumbs up if they have actually employed a working group so far. Yes, I'm not seeing any. Okay, great. So maybe this will be a new initiative to try. Sarah says that they currently don't have any. At West Hants. However, we are working to create one for EDIA. Thanks, Sarah.
So that might be if they're working to create one for EDIA, this tool could be used for that working group as well, to monitor maybe other actions and outcomes related to things outside of accessibility that are a bit more general or broader, different focus.
And I would ask, is the working group, I mean, is the concept that that's going to help, I guess, help implement the plan? But like, what's their scope? Like, if you had to do an invitation, what would you say to the working group, Lisa?
Oh, can I just jump in here because Katie MacArthur
Oh.
has a comment that is maybe a really nice way to put this. So Katie says that she has it in the draft of their plan update, at least at the municipality, to have a group of accessibility champions across departments. She said, we're so big, so it's pretty necessary. It's a nice way to phrase it.
Mhm. Especially when there's a mix of municipalities or groups, I can see that would be really useful for those leads. But yeah, back to the question, because when I go through this, I must say I'm often thinking, what am I going to do as the lead? As opposed to, so once you've pulled in these people for the working group, you've done your checklist about what's going to be reported on. Now they're probably going to say like, okay, go at it, Elise, So do I try to rope them in and say, hey, help me with the survey or help me do a focus group? Or I'm just thinking that maybe the working group, the demand really isn't, I mean, we want their input, but it's not a huge demand, is it? It's not like an advisory committee.
I mean, really, the most important piece of this is deciding what you're going to monitor. And I don't think that that's a wise thing for one person to do on their own, like the accessibility lead, or so, even if you're bringing together, start with something small. Always start with something small. And so it might be just bringing some people together for one meeting and only focusing on choosing actions and outcomes, and
Right.
create dialogue around why do you think that's important? And then is it feasible for us? Is it realistic for us to measure that, to monitor that? And maybe out of that first meeting, there might be a few people who want to get together more often.
Like in my case, I'm thinking I would love to have it at the director's table. I feel like I want every director so that I would catch a little bit of every department. I would catch a counselor and somebody from the advisory committee and maybe open up a public spot. Like that would be for me a nice fill, but I do want to get a good cross section of staff. I think if it's too much public first voice, it's not going to infiltrate staff enough. Yeah, and just again reminding all staff that it is everybody's work.
And having directors there is, if they're buying into monitoring a couple of these actions and outcomes, then that will filter down to staff who might actually have to collect the data, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And like to Michelle's point, so it's like reminding directors too, like this really should be on your radar. As busy as you are, just let's help choose what we're going to monitor, what we're going to. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the issue I'm having. Like I have several people here that are they're very engaged in accessibility, but the issue is everyone is so busy, right? And there's not much I can do about that. Everybody, like people are telling me that they're really pressed for time. So, but I think like like the way you were describing, starting off with one meeting and starting off small, like I think that should be doable.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
We have the same problem. Terry Lynn and Laura Beth can I'm sure they would agree with us. Like we've been doing an evaluation at the directorate for a couple of years, and it's really hard because everyone's so busy, and this is often work that's done on the side of everyone's desk. But we have made some progress in this. Where now, for example, we're producing monitoring reports on how much training we're delivering, and I can't think of them right now. Terry Lynn, what are our monitoring reports? Oh, membership on various committees and making sure that there's 50% people with disabilities. We want to push that a little bit further in the next couple of years, and ensuring that there's other diversity in the group. So, we're taking baby steps as well in terms of trying to get this work done. It is tough. The other thing I'll mention, though, this might be a good time, is that you may be aware that there's a quality of life for people with disabilities index being developed. And so that's being done by independent of government, funded by government, the directorate, but it's being developed by the Nova Scotia League for Equal Opportunity. And they have an advisory council of 20 plus representatives of disability organizations mainly. And so they're working with Engage Nova Scotia to use that survey to measure, our goal is to measure changes in the quality of life for people with disabilities over the long term. So hopefully that data, the plan is to have that data that we can break it down by region, ideally maybe county. We're not sure how far we can break that down, but that would be something that we would share with all municipalities once we get that first the baseline report developed. That's very exciting because it's really hard to measure changes and improvements of quality of life. It's a tough thing to measure.
So there's a comment here from Laura that it says, it helps to have someone dedicated to monitoring and evaluation. Is there anyone in policy and planning in your organizations who could help with monitoring and evaluation and reporting? If not, could you designate a lead for monitoring and evaluation? Having information that shows the progress you are making is so valuable for everyone, especially decision makers, so they can share the impact this work is having. And I would also add that it will also save time. When as Elise pointed out earlier, having all this information in one place is also part of succession planning. It's also part of your plan update. So in practice, having this tool in place and having departments participate should help save time in the future as you continue to move your accessibility plans forward. Oh, you're muted, Lisa.
So it's 2:30 and we have until 3. Okay, so let's go back to our slide deck, and if we could show the logic model, the pathway to accessibility. I hate using the word logic model because it's such a technical term. So that's why we call it a pathway to accessibility. And what we wanted to do, bring it up on my own slide, there we go.
You want me to? Am I sharing? It says I'm sharing.
Can you share the one-page visual of the logic model, the pathway?
Yes, and I think you put it again in the end here.
Mhm.
So that's the grayed out one.
No, the slide 45.
There we go.
Yeah.
Is that big enough? I can make it bigger.
Oh, that's good. So what we wanted you to do is to take a couple of minutes on your own and read through the key actions and the foundational outcomes, and think about, like, choose 3 of each, 3 actions, 3 outcomes, foundational outcomes, and and choose 3 for each that you think would be useful for your municipality to monitor. So we do that on your own, and then we'll have a discussion on that. So it's 2:34. Why don't we take 5 minutes? Or is that too much time?
That's lots, I think.
Okay, so back on at 2:40, 2:39.
Sure. It's very exacting, 2:39.
Yeah, so the question is, why do you think this would be an important action and outcome for your municipality to monitor?
Okay, one more minute. Okay, it's 2:39.
All right. So I'm hoping a few of you will volunteer to share a couple of actions that you feel would be good for your municipality to monitor, and to share with the group why that would be the case. We'll start with actions.
I'm happy to volunteer myself because I'm also going to use the tool within AMANS and the work that I'm doing, because there are a lot of parts in here, pieces in here that are really going to help me and I think help our organization. So under the actions, I selected number 3. So to deliver and participate in training and education. So, that's something that I can monitor and record in one spot, which is really great, particularly for reporting to our partners and our funders and to the municipalities, as well as within our own organization and the board. With that action, foundational outcomes would be increased awareness and increased capacity to identify barriers, and how we're going to remove those barriers. Which also applies to the other key action of number 5, apply the accessibility lens to policies, regulations, bylaws, and processes. And we've already started doing that a little bit within AMANS. We have a new policy analyst. So I'm thinking ahead to working group and policy analyst on that working group, and engaging that person in this work as well. And then that other piece on the monitoring, evaluation, and reflection, so number 8. And even after events that we do, the accessibility lens needs to be applied to any of the events that we are holding, such as the annual conferences, and for us to be able to, kind of even look at those conference pieces and apply the lens to ensure that in upcoming conferences or events that we host, that improvements are made from our learnings from the previous ones. And again, that has to do with awareness and capacity, those foundational outcomes.
Excellent, thank you. Capacity is so important to monitor, because if people don't have the knowledge and skills that they need to identify and prevent and remove barriers, that's a huge barrier for your municipality to do the work. So it's good to always be checking in with people who are supposed to be doing the accessibility work to make sure they have the know-how on how to do it. So Rachel.
I'd like to share 2 key actions that I think I'd really like to focus on here in East Hants. I think no one's really, that's true. There are key people that are thinking about accessibility, but as a whole, I don't think the organization or people within different departments are necessarily thinking about it in their regular day-to-day job. So I think I would like to focus on apply accessibility lens to municipal policies, regulations, bylaws, and processes, so that it is more of a everyone thinks about it and how they impact, because I think really it's hard to some people to associate the work that they're doing and how that fits within that accessibility lens. And I think along that line, deliver, participate in accessibility training and education. I think that would be key to getting people to applying that lens to everything that we do. So those two, I feel like, kind of go hand in hand together.
Mhm. And are you already you're already delivering training to staff or municipal staff participating in training or not yet around accessibility?
I've done a lunch and learn, and I've invited people to, join the lunch and learn that AMANS provides. And I think like that's generally what I've done. I've like this last week, the week before, sorry, I post stuff on the staff website just promoting accessibility, and I do send out emails occasionally just kind of celebrating some of the things that we've achieved, but that's it really.
Mhm. One of the tools that we do need to include in the compendium is a short 3 to 5 question survey that you can easily attach to the end of training sessions that give people a chance to provide feedback on the training and whether it improved their knowledge and how it could be made better. Did that content hit the mark, that kind of thing. All right, applying the accessibility lens, do you have an actual tool, or are you talking about sort of just having a conversation as your municipality looks at policies and so on?
I mean, that actual key action is in our accessibility plan. It's not worded exactly the same way, but essentially that's what it is. But we don't do it. Everyone's so busy with their day-to-day job. It's just, I think it's like that extra thing that they need to think about, and it needs to become kind of second nature that they do that. So I don't have a plan for how that might work. But I think it's something that we should be focusing on here to really kind of make some headway outside of what our accessibility plan, those specific individual action items identify.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Katie.
Hi. Um, Hi everyone. I feel like I'm not going to answer your question exactly.
Okay.
I feel like I think this is going to be really helpful to me. So just in the midst of kind of like updating or kind of thinking about our update of our accessibility plan, kind of monitoring and evaluation has been a big piece of what I've been thinking about, because I think while I'm collecting a lot of information about who's taken what types of training, like what are different, I work with a bunch of different organizations, so what our organizations are doing, I don't think we've currently done a great job of assessing the actual impact of those things. So like, I know who's taken what training and what percentage, but like, has that impacted the way that they actually do their job? That to me is going to be a big part of kind of the way I would use this tool, because I think I'm already collecting a lot of information, but the impact piece, I think we're missing. I will say, I think all of those key actions are kind of integrated into our accessibility plan. So I almost don't see how I would not track all of those things if we're going to actually evaluate how we're doing in terms of implementing our accessibility plan. So I may have just like slightly overwhelmed myself, but shoot, I had another thought there. The other thing I guess I think about is working with different organizations, how we break down impact on each of those different organizations. We have a joint plan, but one of the things that I'll be working on with our plan update is really having a solid work plan from each organization year to year, and then how we assess how well each organization has done on the goals that they've created. So for me, I kind of feel like there might need to be a working group at each organization, which is 8. So it just because they may all have slightly different goals and things that they want to track in there, because I work with 7 villages and the municipality. So how each of them want to what each of them want to track may be a little bit different, but because they're all involved in our joint accessibility plan, we may be kind of tracking them all. Sorry, so that was not at all your question. But I do think it'll be really useful because I think right now I track a lot of information, but it's in a lot of different places. It's in feedback forms, it on training that we do. It's in, like, I did a needs assessment when I first started of staff to see how many staff had taken accessibility training and in what ways and that sort of thing. So to be able to compare the data that we would get now when we're updating our accessibility plan, compared back to 2 years ago or almost 2 years ago when I started will be really helpful to see kind of what impact that's had so far. And I guess we're doing a lot of this work anyway in updating our plans, right? Because like we're having to assess, like, are there new goals that we have? So we're putting out new, or will be, just working on all of this for a meeting next week. But we'll be engaging with the community and with staff and at all of the different organizations again over the summer and the fall, to make sure that we're looking at what's been working and what hasn't been working and what goals should be added to our accessibility plan, all those things. So it feels like we're going to be doing this work anyway. So it's just a way to bring it together, right? Like to have it in a really, in a usable form that then it's easy to then be able to report on it, to be able to say, this is what we found and this is what has worked and hasn't worked and that sort of thing. Sorry, that was a
Oh,
long.
I think a useful place for you maybe to start would be to look at those priority questions.
Yeah.
If you start talking about having so much data, those priority questions will help you get some kind of focus. And
Yeah.
then take a look at the Excel spreadsheet, which sort of links the questions to the indicators and so on and so forth. And this summer, it sounds like you're going to be doing monitoring and evaluation by going out and asking people what worked well and what didn't work well.
Yeah.
Like that's all part of evaluation.
That's
And I think a point that we make in the guide is it doesn't always have to be really formal, like even just sort of checking in with people after meetings and so on. That's all part of the work.
for sure.
The other thing that might be useful for you is to take a close look at is that tracking form.
Mhm.
Yeah, that might help organize things a bit.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I think it's because I think a lot of the data is there. Like I've got it all. I track everything, maybe too of all. But, but yeah, just kind of having it all in one place. So it's super easy to use. I think that will be beneficial for sure.
So this is, I guess, just kind of a logistics question, then a technical question. So in the tracking tool, the Excel workbook. So for in a situation like Katie's, where she has, did you say 9? So 9?
7. No,
8,
Eight.
7 villages and the
And the
municipality.
municipality, 7 villages in the municipality. So then, so for the indicators, so under each indicator, so 1.1, would Katie be adding additional rows for each village and municipality? So for the people who have joint plans, would they be adding their own rows within the
depends on how they're
spreadsheet?
going to how are they going to report? Like what are they required to report? Are they required to report as one unit, or do them each of the villages and the municipality want to do one report, or each their own? I think that question would have to be decided or answered first. Katie, you
Mhm.
have your hand up?
Yeah, I just found, so for me, I know currently we have our joint plan and there is no individual reporting requirement. And I think there, at least for us, there needs to be, because it's too easy, as a collective for like one organization or a few organizations to be doing lots of work and the other ones not so much. And it doesn't show anywhere. So I think for us, that's why in our plan update, in my monitoring and evaluation section, we'll be kind of putting in that each, well, they all have to accept it first, but I have proposed to put in that that each organization has a work plan year to year. We still have our joint plan that each organization would have a work plan year to year and then would have to report on that work plan, on the impact, like on the how much work they've done and then the impact of that. Which has created, like, will create lots of work for me, which is great. But I think it's critical in our situation because otherwise, some some organizations just, and sometimes it's just in terms of their own capacity can just kind of fly under the radar a bit more. And it's just better to understand what they're able to focus on and then whether they have been able to do that. Anyway, sorry, that may be just a me problem, but
No, I think no, that's why I brought this up because I think for those of you with the joint plans, and it's if you have two or three, maybe much less complicated than eight,
right.
7, 8, or 9. And having those additional rows, and then, because you're a data collector, as you said, so this will really help you. And then having those additional rows under each outcome would really let you see where more capacity, is needed to be developed, and how then you can support or what that organization needs to do. So I think overall tracking individually like that would be really helpful in a bigger spreadsheet like this. It will be a lot of work, but ultimately it'll start to show the gaps, and how, and then you can plan for, catching people up.
Yeah. And for me, I just am going to find it helpful, I think, just in terms of being able to have more specific support to different organizations, because currently it feels like I'm trying to support everybody in the same way when they're not all the same organizations, right? And so, or a similar way, right? So it will just be able to break it down more easily. So yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Michelle?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really appreciate that question, Julie. So I'm working with 3 municipalities. We have a joint plan, but they each all have their own individual action plan, which have some quite different items in them. So it does make it more complicated, but yeah.
Great. And just to be able to see everything all in one place. And
Yes.
again, for that succession planning, it's really important overall. Rachel just said she shared the MEL guide documents with their EDI committee. Thank you for all the work that went into this. Yes, thank you very much to the working group and Lisa and Elise, Ellen, Melissa Myers.
Great.
Yeah,
Rachel. So
Greg. Yeah.
could you go to that last slide, Elise, or the one that says next steps? A couple more minutes. There. So we're going to refine the guide. As I said, we're going to include a new tool for after training that you can use. And with respect to the tools, the working group at the very beginning wanted to make sure, and this was also missing in the guide, that there are very creative ways to collect data, like photo voice or having a town hall or that kind of thing. And we didn't include that, but we will include that, a list of some other non-traditional ways of collecting data. The other thing is we haven't reviewed the tools, the data collection tools that are in there for plain language. So that's something else we need to do. So the wording might change. For all of the tools, they're designed so that you can modify them to suit your needs. But I was hoping that maybe one or two people on this group, if they were willing, if they could do a really careful read of the guide, because we've been immersed in it for a while, and so our learning has really increased. But it would be really helpful if we had someone with fresh eyes to go through it and say, oh no, that there's still something missing here, I don't get it. So if you are interested in doing that, you could send Julie an email and she'll flip it to me. And then, so the plan is to publish the guide as a sort of an evergreen guide this summer. And then you'll have, some time to start to play around with it. And then I think, Julie, you were talking about in the fall, maybe having a community of practice of some sort to sort of circle back, talk about the tool and how it's going and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be great. And
The
to do
learning,
a
I guess, in
check-in.
this work.
Yeah, to check in, and maybe we can have a couple of volunteers at that point to share their screens and their tool and show us the progress and maybe how they've used it so far. That would be great.
So I think that's it. Any questions for us? Comments? No?
Everybody's going to need a strong shot of espresso after this to get into it. It is a lot. It's a lot for the eyeballs. It's a lot for the brain. But when you break things down into those, those, what do they say? Bite-sized chunks. Yeah, it starts to kind of all make sense and you're able to see the bigger picture. So I really want to thank Elise and Lisa today for presenting the tool and walking us through it, and for everybody here for participating and asking your questions and giving your comments. The session has been recorded. I will post the session in our municipal ideas on the community of practice, as well as the tools as they currently are, so you can start to familiarize yourself with them. And then when the final tool is ready, then we will update everybody with that evergreen content. So thank you very much. And yeah, great work, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
You want to stick around for a second, Julie?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe we can stop.
Yep. And I will. Oh, let me just stop recording. There we go.